Is your succession plan going to leave a mess for your family? That's the question we're going to delve into today and give you answers and solutions that you can take to your farming business operation to make it better, more peaceful, and better for the next generation.
Welcome to Extreme Ag's Cutting the Curve. More than just a podcast, it's the place for insights and information you can apply immediately to your farming operation for increased success. This episode of Cutting the Curve is brought to you by AgXplore, with innovative products that improve fertilizer efficiency, protect yield potential, and reduce stress. AgXplore helps growers maximize field potential. Find out how AgXplore can help you get more out of your crop at agxplore.com. And now, here's your host, Damian Mason.
Hey there, welcome to another fantastic episode of Extreme Ag's Cutting the Curve. It's me, your host, Damian Mason. You knew that, and I've got Ben Hansen with Gross & Company, an accounting firm that does a tremendous amount of agricultural work out of Dunlap, Iowa. Ben and I know one another, in fact, because of the extreme ag work we do, and he does the work for Kelly Garrett. And I said, you know what, Ben? I've been around this my whole life. I've talked about it in my own Business of Agriculture podcast a number of times. I said, farm people, hardworking people, they want to go out and they'll do everything they can to maximize the resources on their land and maximize the returns on their capital investment. But you know what? They somehow, and this is not just farmers, it's everybody. When you talk about death, and you talk about the next thing, you talk about planning for retirement, you talk about planning for what happens next. Farmers are worse than average, and most people are not very good at to begin with. They hide, put your head in the sand. That will not leave your family a very good situation. We've all seen it. You've been to the auctions, you've been to the coffee shop, you've been to the county fair, you've been to the funeral home where it's an absolute spat, it's a feud, it's a mess. Are you going to leave that sort of a financial wake of disaster for your family? Ben Hansen, Gross & Company, as you say, you are the company in Gross & Company. You've seen it. And you're not telling any horror stories. You're not talking about anybody behind their back. We all see it. Why the hell does this happen?
Damian, thanks for having me. First of all, I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you this morning. And this is a very interesting conversation, and it's really a hard one to have in general with people, because the thought of succession planning means retirement potentially, right? Or worst case is mortality, right? And no longer being with us. And so people don't necessarily like to think about that stuff. They don't like to talk about it. They don't like to share their thoughts with their family. But I think the more that you can talk about it, the better off you will be from a mental state of mind, just long term, to know that, hey, I have a plan in place. My family can stay together. We don't have to worry about them arguing over their assets, or my assets, or my family's assets once I'm no longer around here. And to just like putting your crop in and taking it out, you set up a plan with your agronomist. The bigger picture is that you do all this work, on a year-to-year basis, day-to-day basis. But if you don't, plan to what happens to it after you're no longer with us, you've done all this work just to leave a mess for your family, just like you said, Dane.
So there's a stat. I had a guy on my Business of Agriculture podcast, and he works with, and he's not an accountant. He's more of like a advisor in a business capacity, and he gets down to the personal level of it. But he says the stat he has is 77% of farming operations in North America have no succession plan. If that's true, and I believe it's close, that's tragic.
It is terrible. And I would actually say that the number is maybe greater than that, maybe that 80-85%. And that's just me pulling it out of my back pocket compared to when you initially see an ag family. And having a plan is one thing, a succession plan, but actually having the correct pieces in place to make it happen is another thing. And you may talk about, well, this kid gets this piece of ground, I'm gonna have my son buy my equipment from me. But when, right? When does the equipment process start? Right. When does what's your last crop year, and actually sticking to it, being transparent to your family members, one, but also your banker, your attorney, your accountant, that they can help you put the correct plan in place so that, it's not quite so burdensome when you do decide to retire and put your succession plan in place.
We talked about, you said the reason why folks neglect it, and it's not just farm people, but farm people are the worst. I think they're worse. And I'll tell you the other thing, they tend to have more assets. So, farmers, live cash poor, but asset rich and all that. So if that's what you have and that's what you value, why don't you value managing it for the next generation or whatever that should be? Maybe you have no kids like me. Okay, fine. Well, then I'd rather that I be in charge of it and my wife be in charge of it than the court. And so,
Right.
If it's the most valuable thing you have, you should manage it. And I think that the problem that I see is they just hate addressing. And it also, if you owned 4 dry cleaners, I always use these kinds of examples. Say you owned 4 dry cleaners, you probably had this idea, okay, it's a family-owned business, just like the farm, but there's less emotion. It's usually like, all right, I've got 3 kids and I have 4 dry cleaners, and my back's shot. I've been standing here pressing, shirts for 35 years. There's less emotion about it than there is about the damn grain bin and the barn on the hill and, Grandma Whitaker's house and all that kind of thing. So is it the emotion? Is it the too tight family thing? Why is it so unaddressed?
I think it is the emotion, like you have a business that you maybe, buy during your lifetime. It probably wasn't your family's. You bought it to make money, to have a career, to do something that you were passionate about, hopefully. And then ultimately, when you sell it, you're like, hey, this can go to the next person. Hopefully you maximize your value. From a farm perspective, you may have been born on that farm. You may have raised your family on that farm, and then you care for it. So I think the breed of people that are farmers in general care a lot more about their business that they have, and the thought of actually giving it up, crushes them to some extent, right? But my thought is, this is succession. It's the possibility of passing it on to the next generation or to someone else that will care for that land and your crop the same way you did, and you can pass on that knowledge that you have. I really think about succession plan in 3 different phases. One phase is, while you are, farming and in the process of generating your farm business and growing your farm business, which means, do you have the proper life insurance? Do you have, a catastrophe plan put together, so that if something does happen to you while you're in operation, that your wife or your attorney or whoever it is knows, the 20 checklist items that they need to go to, where are you selling your grain at? Where do you have, debt at, and Damon, I can go through my next 2 if you want, or.
Well, I want us to start with that one. Okay. Because now we've
Okay.
described why it happens and all that. Let's be honest. It's irresponsible to not have these things buttoned up. And, we
Right.
don't delve into this a lot, Ben. You keep up with Extreme Ag. A lot of our stuff is about nutrient allocation and the right machinery and the right placement of products and maximizing agronomics. We don't dig into this, but we have a subset of episodes where it's the business side of farming. And to pretend that you shouldn't pay attention to the business side of farming is just ridiculous. You do the hard work. You'll wake up early. You'll go out and you'll sacrifice your back doing this stuff. But there's a business side of this. And so that's why I've got my business book back here in the background, because I want to delve into it. So now you just brought up number one. Number one, succession, everybody thinks, well, that's when I'm 80. Well, okay. We still are in a business where we're like 3rd in terms of accidents, right? Mining and construction and farming. Let's say it's something, God knows, terrible happens and you're dead. My brother was a farmer and was getting ready to take a trip. He said, oh, hey, by the way, on the way out the door, after having 6 drinks, said, by the way, if something happens, and he ran through like 30 things that I was supposed to handle. I said, Is this documented anywhere? Am I legally even allowed to do that? I'm supposed to liquidate your livestock. Am I even allowed to? Am I power of attorney? Do I have, am I even on the paperwork? Am I the executor of the estate? Well, you know what to do. And I think that's not an uncommon thing. Like, just you take care of this when something happens. So let's talk about that. What happens what do you need to, what should people do if something happens?
Or before something
That's what I'm
happens,
saying.
really,
So,
right?
okay, I've got
Yeah.
right now, the responsible thing to do is I have an ongoing operation. I've got crops, acres, debt, equipment, kids, livestock. What should I do to make sure that if all of a sudden I get hit by, I run over myself with the combine? What should I know?
There's, from a very, very high level, my number one recommendation is that you have, a will, right? Because your will dictate a lot of, what can be done with your estate, right? So who can make decisions upon, your demise and act in the best interest of your farm operation? That's, number one, probably most important. So I like to go on vacation, and I seems like, when I'm on vacation, you may do a little bit more risky things. You're in a plane, you may go skydiving, something like that. So I did get a will update, and it makes you think about a lot of these things. So I'd say number one. Number two, I would put together, that, the day in the life of, the farmer. Who do you deal with on a day-to-day basis, that would know what's going on with your operation. So that person that is your power of attorney, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your best friend, whether it's your attorney, that they'll know these are the 25 people that we should contact, to make sure that we've got all the loose ends buttoned up. And then finally, I think you should actually visit with those people, so that they know what that process, looks like. A lot of times, that it may be your accountant or banker or attorney, so they know who they're dealing with, but that person knows, hey, this is my intermediary, and or these are the people that I deal a lot with, so you should know them. And if something happens to me, I really want you to work closely with them to tie up my loose ends.
Yeah, it's mostly then the legal aspect of it, and you're not an attorney, nor am I, but there's this fear of going in. But in most communities, there's an attorney group, and maybe it's not in your little town, maybe it's in Omaha, maybe it's wherever. But the point is, there's an attorney group that probably does a lot of agricultural transition, and
Right.
and that's, we live in an internet world. In other words, it doesn't have to be, in the little town of Bippas, 4 miles from my farm here. Maybe it's in Indianapolis, but the point is there are attorneys that specialize in this, and they probably, if you do the work and schedule the meeting, will walk you through, hey, the first thing you should do, like you say, Ben, is who's the 2 dozen people that need notified? Who is the power of attorney if you're hit in a car accident and you're injured but still alive? Because power of attorney can make the decisions, right? So that's what you're talking about. That's the first thing, is setting those things up.
Yeah. The other thing that I think about a lot with farmers as I have these discussions with them is they have a lot of these plans in their mind that they're like, hey, this guy down the road here, he's helped me for years and years and years. I've always told him that if something happens to me, then I'm gonna cut him a deal on this, right? Well, unfortunately, if it's never been wrote down or documented or put in your will, it doesn't matter, what you've said or discussed, because then it's hearsay. And once you're no longer with us, that can't be executed, right? If it's
By
in
the
your
way,
will, if it's in your trust.
It's somewhere between irresponsible or naive, because I have heard that no less than 6 dozen times. I've heard it in my neighborhood. We bought this place. We bought this farm, Ben. And after we were renovating it, and an attorney called me up and said he got a call from a guy that used to work over here as a hired hand, and he was told in the 80s or 90s that he was supposed to have first chance to buy this. And here he finds out, because he reads in the paper, that Damian and Lori Mason had bought the place. I said, okay. I said, what the hell am I supposed to do? But he says, well, there's no documentation. This is not something recorded. I said, well, clearly it was not. That exact thing happened. And
right.
by the way, you wonder if it's naivete, or you wonder if it's almost like that person was using them. Hey, you know what? You're coming over and helping me out for free, but you know what? Someday I'm gonna give you first chance to buy this. Are they screwing them, or is it that they really genuinely believe that telling them that is going to make it happen?
Right. It's just that they never got around to it, potentially, right? Or, some people, I like to believe that the good in all people, right? Some people just may have, not truly meant it, right? Or if you help me for so long, then I will, do this on your behalf. And, a lot of people like to do things on a handshake agreement, but that handshake doesn't matter, if you're no longer with us or if you can't execute
A
it,
handshake
right?
agreement's fine on buying a load of hay.
Right.
Handshake agreement on transitioning a couple $1,000,000 of agricultural asset is a legal matter. So the right answer is, if you really want to do that, if you want to help out the guy down the road, the guy and his wife down the road that you've been friends with, and you've always had a good relationship with, what do? You can put in your will that they get first right to buy at 20% reduction of 20% less than appraised value. They can do that, right?
Absolutely. They absolutely can. Essentially, you can do about anything within the terms of your estate that you want to, as long as you're under the estate exemption. So we won't get too far into that, but yeah, your assets can go to non-family members. As I like to tell a lot of my clients, they can gift up to $17,000 a year to their kids, to their hairdresser, to their accountant, my kids,
How much can I
whoever
get
they
per year?
want. $17,000.
Without any tax obligation. Now, the thing is, let's say that always scares people, because then they think, well, I'm not ready to give my money away. You don't have to. You can also, again, you can set up a legal instrument. Help me out here. If I want to make sure that my buddy down the road gets first chance to buy this property at 25% off of market price, I can stipulate all that, correct?
You absolutely can. You can put that as a separate item within your will, or even in your trust if you have one set up, that you can establish, who will buy something. You can even fix it for a certain value. So, say ground's going for $10,000 an acre, and you want to sell it to your neighbor for 6 because he's been so good to you. You absolutely can do that. You can fix the price if you want, or you can say must be appraised, and we're going to give them a 20% discount, so they have the first right to buy it. They may say they don't want to, right?
Right, right. Then, so there's let's get past the intimidation factor. And
Okay.
because, in other words, you can do about anything, right? Not, as long as it's legal, you can do about anything through legal instruments, as long as it's not breaking the law. The other part of it is, always saying something doesn't fix anything. Yeah, he always told me that he was going to do this. Well, that doesn't do anything, because we know that happens. Hey, I told my kids this. Like, is that documented anywhere, right?
Right. As long as someone can shake your hand and they're there to shake your hand, you can believe them. But when they're no longer with us, then it really comes down to if it's in writing.
Yeah, and not even just like written down and like scribbled in a drawer in the chest of drawers. It's got to be actually legally documented.
Yeah, I would say the back of the napkin, type deal doesn't work out great here, because, then they can be contested. I would say that you probably need to have a legal document, even the first right of refusal of some sort document that's not necessarily in your will, drafted by an attorney, which they'd have a better idea exactly what those documents are, to say, hey, upon my demise or in this year, this person has the right to buy it, this asset, whatever it is, at X price.
So let's talk about, then we said, is your succession plan leaving a mess for your family? What are the messes? I mean, the first one is having no plan, right?
Yep.
And also, well, I always said, always saying or telling the people at the Thanksgiving dinner table, that is not business. That is again, it's irresponsible to think that has handled anything. That's number 1 and 2. To not have a plan in order to think that somehow telling somebody is actually doing it and fixing it. We've just given examples. Third thing I think that leaves a mess, and I want your take on this, is not unclear communication. Especially when there's siblings, etc., and your offspring. So kind of address that, please, Ben.
Yeah, so that's really, let's say that you go through retirement or you get to succession, and at the time of retirement, and you gift a bunch of your assets to maybe the one son that's working for you, and that's you and your wife or just you's decision to do that, and you aren't fully transparent to your other kids. A lot of times it causes a lot of animosity, right? Of saying, well, why, what was the reason? And once you're no longer with us and they find, your kids may find this thing out, or your kids that aren't involved, they get, to some extent very jealous. They don't understand, why you made that decision. And to the extent that you can explain to them, this is why I've done what I have, or here's how I have everything set up, and here's how I believe it's, fair, is important to discuss with your family just to keep everyone together if that's, truly what your goal is after you're no longer with us. You've had the scenario that, let's just say 40 acres goes to auction, and one son thought he was going to buy it, right? Well, that son once again said, Dad said I'd have the right to buy it at X. He never put it in writing. His went to the court system, and they said, well, all the siblings have to decide on what the price is going to be. Well, it seems like you always have maybe that one sibling that says, nope, Mom and Dad wanted us to sell it at market, and if you want to pay fair market value for it, you can buy it then. And so then it ends up that family never talks again. They may not get together again, especially, so it's not the perfect scenario. And there's never probably a perfect scenario, but a lot of people or farmers in that succession plan avoids the conversation because they know that it will create some tension.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what happens. So they avoid it, and then die, and then it becomes it was a ticking time bomb that finally blew up. I've lived it. So other ways to avoid mess. Now, give me the solution. We got people here listening. They've stuck with our thing, the business side of farming. What's the solution? How do we avoid these messes? So we talked about communication. We talked about obviously having it legally handled, which you said 80% don't.
Right.
What else? Let's talk about accountant. You're the accountant, not the attorney. So let's talk about the accounting side of it.
The accounting side of it is, like I said earlier, there's like 3 phases of, the succession plan. There's while you're operating, when you truly are ready to retire, and to give your accountant, banker, attorney the foresight of saying, hey, my last crop's in 5 years. Here's my plan. Help me out with developing the best plan that you can. It seems like to me, I might have some clients come in and they're like, I've figured out my plan. And they essentially, their first comment is, I'm going to sell my equipment on contract. And I just lean back in my chair and I say, I've already blown up your plan. Because their thought is that they're going to sell their equipment on contract and they're going to pick up this gain over the term of the contract. Well, unfortunately, the IRS doesn't like you putting equipment on contracts because they call it a hot asset and it's all taxable in year 1. So it seems like we maybe have to unwind that thing. Whereas if they've already done it, that's like rule number 1. I tell a lot of my clients, I'm like, don't call me after you did something. Do me a favor and call me while you're planning, and I can help you set it up correctly, or at least give you the tax advice so that we can tell the attorney to set it up correctly.
By the way, that's an interesting one. Is, hey, I did this because the guy I'm buddies with at the coffee shop said that's what you should do, and then you sit back here and say, I'm the person that's a professional accountant that looks at farm books every day. You didn't think that you consult me, but your buddy at the coffee shop told you that. No, you just cost yourself hundreds of thousands of dollars. You've had to have that conversation, haven't you?
Not quite that bad, but typically they've been, yeah, my attorney's drawing this up right now. It's like, hey, let's pump the brakes. We need to think about this a little bit, right? And a lot of times for people it does come down to cost, which just baffles me that they're like, well, I don't want to pay for this advice. It's like, yeah, but you'll pay $200 an acre for fertilizer. It's like, hey, let's try to figure out our values here and what's important. So I generally tell that person that they get what they pay for, right? That person at the coffee shop charged them nothing and they really got nothing out of it. So yeah, planning in advance is a big deal. Let's just talk about, the best way to do this, and we can help you structure it correctly so that Uncle Sam isn't quite in your back pocket as much as you think they should be, or they aren't in your back pocket any more than they should be, right?
Right. So then the other one about from the accounting standpoint is, you talk about the depreciations and the appreciations and all that kind of stuff. A lot of these guys and gals that are out here that have assets and they're, late middle age, approaching, the thought of succession planning. There's a lot of assets to manage. And then there is a concern that they might think, but I need income. That's the thing. Like okay, I'm ready to hand things over to the kids, which farmers don't like to do. I'm 70, but I need money. So what's your advice to those people so that the financials are okay and the succession plan is also okay?
And so from that perspective is you really have to go back to what's your cost of living. So we try to work backwards to say how much money do you need on an annual basis or even better on a monthly basis to survive. And then let's make sure you can, properly retire and generate the plan that you want. Because if you don't truly know what you need, it's going to provide for some dissatisfaction or dissatisfier down the road of saying, well, my accountant told me I had to do this and I didn't get good advice. And well, maybe it was the fact that you didn't give them good information on the front end to help them plan to make sure that they have the correct amount of income during retirement. And, you can set that up in multiple ways. Is your land rent, proper? Is it, the amount that you need? Is your equipment, the lease to buy, contract correctly? And, at the age of 70, what's your social security like? What do you have for other investments? What are all these pieces of the pie that are coming in that will allow you to live comfortably, throughout retirement and do the things that you truly enjoy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, let's get out of here on preventing a mess. You just talked about the money stuff. We talked about obviously the main thing we started with and we're end with it obviously is that, telling somebody something doesn't do anything.
Right.
Saying to the kid, but the big one then is the non-farming siblings. The ones that leave a mess are, and I've heard the stories and, I've seen the speakers that talk about this on the ag circuit. The guy that's your age or my age that's been working back at the farm for 25 years, then all of a sudden finds out when mom and dad die, he has to buy out his 3 sisters that moved to Chicago who haven't been on the farm since they went away to college at market price. And he doesn't have any way of doing that because only thing he has is 25% of, so like all of a sudden it's like, you just invented a situation that, I want my son to stay and farm. It's impossible. He has to come up. He can't come up with $5 million to buy out his 3 sisters, and he can't do that. So, what's your advice there?
I think it gets back to what we were just talking about. To have a true plan, and I think if you take anything away from this conversation, is that a failure to plan is a plan to fail, right? And so if you can plan in advance, you can, not farm until, your mid 80s and not pass anything on to your kids, or kid that's been helping you. Make sure they're involved from a young age. Your next farm that you buy, if you're 70 years old or 65 years old, well, maybe that's an opportunity for the youngster, right? He may not have the financial backing to necessarily do it, but you can help him get started. Set the things up in your will or start transferring assets during the time when you're alive. And yeah, there's tax consequences that go with those at times. But if you do it efficiently, you took the deduction for the equipment. So, why not, when you have the cash in your pocket, if your son or daughter is buying you out, you have to pay a little bit of tax at that time. But yeah, it's one of those things that if you really develop a plan and you truly want your son or daughter to farm with you and farm for a long time, it may come down to having to give them some gifts in advance of your demise, and then equal it out a different way with your other kids if you need to, right? So that's my advice is set up your plan, put your plan into place. And if everything comes to fruition that you live to the ripe old age of 90 and all you own is a little bit of land yet, that's perfect. And your son can farm and you can help him and watch him. Daughter, son, and daughter have done good about that thus far. I mean, it is really important that you give them that opportunity. And I think more and more it's, you get to that age of, 55, 60 years old, and you have, the youngster that's been with you for a while. Let's start giving them opportunities to, make some of those big decisions, because, if you're 85 years old, most likely you had that child when you were 20 to 30 years old, that person is, getting to the point where they need to maybe think about, retiring, succession. And that just seems like more than someone wants to, bite off at that age. Right. So
I'm going to throw another one out there though, in all honesty. Sometimes there's the lazy son and daughter that are entitled and all that, but there's the other ones that just want to farm and not address the business also. And all of a sudden you're talking about 30 and 40-year-old people that are working in a family farming operation, and they've never said, hey, you know what we need to do? Set up a legal structure. What, here's my compensation. What am I being paid, and how are we doing this? And when can I start buying in? Sometimes you do need to blame the generation that's coming up for not being more forceful and forthright about what their objectives or goals are, to say, you know what, if this is a business, let's run it as such. And I'm not being mean, I'm not being disrespectful to the hierarchy, but let's face it, there's people that are 40 years old that still say, oh, I don't know, it looks like I'm going to get screwed. Well, do something about it.
Yeah, fix some of your own problems to the extent you can. But, it seems like it's a generational thing that I've always been, my dad taught me to just listen. He listened to his dad. And it's a tough conversation to have. But I think it also comes from the older generation, the hierarchy of saying, hey, I need to give up some control, right? Which is a really, really hard thing to do in general, is to give up that control, especially when they may have not been doing it the exact way that you would have done it, right? But as long as the crop still gets planted, it still gets harvested, it gets marketed well, those are the things that you care about. And then, ultimately passing it down to the next generation. If they're not ready at the age of 35, 40, who says they're going to be ready at the age of 55, 60?
Well, precisely. Right? So then you got to ask the questions like, wait a minute, if somehow your 40-year-old isn't capable of making decisions and being involved, then maybe they're not the right person to hand things off to anyhow.
Right. It's crazy. The farming business in general has grown so much over the last 20 years, from the size of numbers that you're dealing with. You used to be able to maybe put in a crop for $300, $400, $500 an acre. I mean, now if you have to pay your rent in March and pay for all your inputs, you may be looking at $1,000 an acre. Yeah. So you're dealing with large line of credits. Land is much more expensive. Equipment's much more expensive. And if you get to the age of 55 and you've never had to do any of that stuff, who says that someone's going to give you the money to do it if you have to borrow a bunch of it, right? So you need to prove a track record to get to where you want to be.
I like leaving it right there. That brought the generational thing together. If you're 55 years old and you're still just a grain cart operator, you're not involved in the business part of it, it's time to go to business. It's time to do crash course on the business side. But that's what this right. is here. A little sub series within the Cutting the Curve episodes. We talk about the business side of farming. His name is Ben Hansen. Are you available if somebody says, I want to dig deeper into this? Obviously for a fee, because you can't be the ag accountant for free. How do they find you?
Yeah, they can find us at Gross & Company. We're in Dunlap, Iowa. We're taking on consulting roles, more or less, to say, hey, let's make sure that we can, help you through this transition. Not necessarily looking for new tax clients or monthly bookkeeping work, but more of the big picture of like, hey, let's look and see how you're structured. Let's see what are your goals, and have those conversations and see if we can't get a plan put together to help you.
Thanks so much for being here. His name is Ben Hansen from Gross & Company, Dunlap, Iowa, talking about the business side of farming. Till next time, thanks for being here, Ben.
Thanks, Damian, for having me. Appreciate it.
You bet. It's Extreme Ag Cutting the Curve.
Thanks for listening to another edition of Cutting the Curve. For more insights and information that you can apply to your farming operation, visit extremeag.farm. Are your crops stressed out? AgXplore has you covered with a full line of products designed to reduce crop stress and improve yields. Check out agxplore.com and start protecting your yields and profits.